Everyone. My name is Deborah Jones, and I'm a volunteer with the Toronto Data Professionals community. And we welcome you to our event this evening, where we have a special guest, John Miner, who will talk to us about controlling our data lake with Databricks and SQL warehouse, SQL warehouse. Whoa. My slides are going crazy. So our agenda for this evening is we were just, chit-chatting there and had a little bit of an intro. Then we'll talk, jump right into John's topic. By way of introductions, John is a senior data architect at Insight Digital Innovation, and he helps corporations solve their business needs with various data platform solutions. He has over 30 years of data processing experience. His architecture expertise encompasses all phases of the software project lifecycle, including design, development, implementation, and maintenance of systems. So if you have attended some of these sessions before, we are the Toronto Data Professionals community. It's one of the largest data professional communities in Canada, and we host monthly events. So you want to keep an eye on meetups to see what's upcoming. So we've got some pictures there of some previous events that we've had. Additional pictures. So just looking ahead, the next event's going to be on April 20th, where we have Randolph West coming to talk about database administration through the ages. As for our sponsor, we have Data and Advanced Analytics from OMERS. They're our partner in bringing these learning topics to you. And from learning more a little bit about data and advanced analytics, I don't know why my slide is not going. There we go. Their priority is their people. They've got a varied portfolio of data and advanced analytics, including BI, data science, and data engineering. Additionally, we've partnered with Your Paints, which is a sustainable lifestyle promoter. And we just encourage everyone to avoid using single-use plastic and use more reusable products. So we thank you again for joining us. And John, I will stop sharing here and hand it over to you.
Of course, I'm on mute. So excellent. Thank you, Deborah. I'm going to share my screen and I will keep my face on the video a little into I'm done at intro and then we'll get into the topic. So yeah, time flies. This is my 7th year as being a MVP, hopefully 8th year. So if you're curious what I'm doing, take a look. There's a lot of good stuff here, including Stack Overflow contributions, in-depth technical articles, as well as videos. So I have a bunch out there. I don't even keep track anymore. The main thing, there's two interesting things I kind of want to promote. Okay, first one is I do write for MS SQL Tips. So a lot of things that I talk about, a lot of presentations become articles and they become more in depth. So something to look forward to. I'm slowly approaching, as you can see, scrolling down over 100 articles. So it's been a passion of mine since 2015. So if you want to read more about, you like what I talk about tonight in the technology, please take a look. What I really wanted to point out to you is this is all out there. All the presentations I do, ever since the last 10 years, they're freely out there on GitHub. So if you go to John Miner 3 community work, so community-work, and if you look at Databricks SQL Warehouse, this is the deck that I'm going to be presenting tonight. It's a PowerPoint presentation. There's some actual data here, so we can see some CSV files and Parquet files. We'll be talking about that. And this is the sales LT, say, for instance, for AdventureWorks, and then we can see the Parquet files, and it's a directory, and in each one we have a actual petition. Okay, so that's Spark. Excuse me. With that said, I'm going to get in a presentation. I'm going to hide my video, and I'm going to pause like maybe 4 times, 5 times during the hour. And Deborah, if you see any questions when I say pause and say, hey, does anyone have any questions? If you can tell me if there's anything in the chat, that'd be awesome.
Sure thing.
Thank you. So like I said, I'm going to turn off my camera. That way it makes the video go faster. And I'm going to get into the slide deck. So I'm going to try to stay in the slide deck for a while and then go over the demo and then slide deck. Okay. So that'll be kind of the format. So that way we don't get too much jumping around. So again, my name's John Miner. I've been over at Insight for almost half a decade plus. Wow, time flies. I think it's 4 months after 5 years. So before that was at Microsoft. So I've been doing Microsoft stuff for pretty much the last 10 plus years. But like my intro, I've been doing this for 30 something years. What we're going to talk about today is how Databricks, okay, has come up with a product called SQL Data Warehouse that has basically the functionality of a data warehouse, but it's built on top of Spark, okay? And why do we want this, okay? So many companies are moving their workloads from premise, okay? And you might have an operational data store, okay? So like a database into in-cloud data lakes. So many times, if regardless of whether or not you use an Azure Synapse Analytics or if you use an ADF, you're probably going to be using some type of Spark processing, okay? And that's a key in player in this transition, okay? So many users do not know other languages, okay? Because to do Spark effectively, kind of need to know either Scala or Python. And you know, hey, guess what? What is distribution and distributed processing? Well, it's partitioning, right? How does partitioning work and so on? So you have to know some concepts to really be effective, right? So how can we get them effective in this environment? Okay. One of the things that's great is this Spark's, the SQL data warehouse is just basically an interface on top of a Databricks Spark, okay? And so if you have SQL skills, you can suddenly be effective. Okay, let's talk about Databricks SQL. Before we get into Databricks, I kind of need to go over what Spark is because it is the foundation, right? So Spark is this kind of conglomerate. It's a unified processing engine that has four components, right? It has a SQL component, and we can see that. I'm going to put my mouse up here and kind of circle around it, SQL component. And that SQL component, we can do something called the data frame. So we can spark.read, puts it into a data frame. What is a data frame? If you know pandas, it's kind of like rows and columns, right? It looks like a table. Spark.sql. And guess what? Once we get in a data frame, we can expose it as a temporary view. And then once it's a temporary view, we can do some SQL processing. But still, we have to write some code. So the idea is try to get away from writing this code. We'll talk how the data warehouse allows you to do that. There's three other aspects that are pretty interesting in the Spark ecosystem, okay? First one's graph, okay? So say if I was going to Toronto tonight, and or yesterday for this meeting if we were doing it in person. And again, I'm just making this hypothetical. And say I had a friend in Chicago and I had another friend in Albany. How would I go? What was maybe I want to see the person in Albany first. So maybe I'd make a graph database and put the locations on, put some weights on the graph, and we could solve that problem with graph technology. Okay. The other two components are here are streaming. What is streaming? That's when you have a like a event hub and you have high-speed events flowing into the hub, and we want to write it to a data set so we can have real-time data. And last but not least, machine learning. So that's the things like solving problems like, hey, can I predict the cost of food in a month? Because, we know ever since 2022, things have changed in the world, right? Things have gone up, right? The economy and so on. Can we, differentiate? Say if I'm at a plant that's making parts, can I tell if this is a bad part or a good part? Well, that's vision, right? So there's a lot of interesting problems that Spark can do. The thing is for each of these, you have to know some type of programming language. The two favorite languages are Scala, which is object-oriented Java, and Python. But that's just an overview of what the foundation underneath the data warehouse is. Okay. So what is a data warehouse? Well, the data warehouse is an interface that makes the Spark ecosystem look like a warehouse. It looks basically like Snowflake. Okay. So we can see at the bottom of here when we have this folder and we have this lightning bolt, that's Azure Data Lake Storage. Okay. And usually when you deal with a data lake, you have to think about different zones. Okay. And different zones are quality zones. The bronze zone basically has usually raw data. This silver zone has something like filtered, cleaned, and augmented data. Augmented means put extra data together. And last but not least, the goal is to curate, okay? So we got these different zones, and we can see this, the Delta engine. Why they call it the Delta engine? Because everything's using Delta files, okay? And we'll get into why Delta is important. They used to call this SQL Analytics, but now it's called SQL Warehouse. And what we have in here is the ability to create queries and run them. We got a query catalog, okay? And we have dashboards and alerts. So we're going to go over each of those features. What they've come up behind the scenes for us to make this work is something called Photon, okay? And Photon is an engine that sits between the Delta the interface and Spark. And basically, it makes things go faster, okay? In short, we also have some things like integrated security and query history. So that and we have also connectors, right? ODBC and JDBC drivers. And a data warehouse is great, but unless someone's using it, it's not that useful, okay? So on the right, we can see some popular SQL and BI reporting layers or serving layers. So we could use Power BI. We can use any reporting tool you like, so it doesn't have to be Power BI. If you Cognos, whatever you like, just put it over there. Synapse, we also have Azure Data Explorer, okay? So this is kind of like a high-level view of what the Databricks SQL warehouse is. Okay, so let's talk about the interface. There's the SQL editor. It allows you to explore the Hive, create queries, execute one time or schedule a query, and save the code that you just created as files, okay? The workspace, just like a workspace in any other Synapse environment, guess what? We can manage folders, we can manage files, we can do dashboards, queries. Well, we can review the executions, how long it took, what was the results, alerts. Given a query condition, we can say, hey, notify this person, right? Data, we can explore the Hive. And last but not least, the warehouse. We need to stop, and terminate computing power. And then admin console. This allows us to set parameters for the warehouse, okay? So in our first example, to explore the warehouse interface, we're going to create a simple automobile database, okay? And we're going to explore the things that you used to in a regular SQL environment, okay? So we're going to create a schema. And in Databricks, a schema is the same thing as a database. So some databases have three-dot notation, like SQL Server has a database.schema.table. In here, you have database and or, you can think of it schema. Then you have tables or views. And we can execute some DML statements and we talk about integrity, okay? So the first example I'm going to talk about is the basic features, and I'm going to go back one and go over the whole workspace and show you where everything is, okay? So at this point, I'm going to pause. Does anyone have any questions of why we want to use a data warehouse instead of using Spark? Okay, well, that's good. So we can see this the interface, okay? And when we come to Databricks, and usually you get this and you click launch, it's going to come into this interface, right? And this is they call this the
I have
control
one
plane.
question. Is this
Yep.
like I mean, I've seen people use the notebooks. Is this like a replacement for the notebooks where you use Spark to query the database, either the database or anything to query? I mean, you can use SQL or Spark or Python or R and use the
Yes.
notebooks.
Yes, you can do that. However, again, the idea at the very beginning of the slide, and maybe you missed it, was that, what was the use case, right? Many end users do not know other languages
Mhm.
as well as distributed processing. So how can they be productive? And the warehouse allows them to leverage the SQL skills that they currently have, right? So that's the whole use case behind this, okay? If you are doing data engineering, advanced data engineering, using, okay, the data science and engineering pane, which is this pane, and you already know how to do notebooks, okay? So let's say I go down and open up a Mount notebook. Okay, and this will be familiar. Guess what? We're looking at Python code. We're looking at widgets. If
Mhm.
you know all this already, then you're off and running. You don't need to do this. However, if you've never worked with Databricks and you know SQL, but you want to work with your data lake, then this is the place to go.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome. So again, it just like the other pane, there's always like a recent one that allows you to do here. And you can actually do some things like Delta Live Tables. Delta Live Tables allows you to monitor a directory and create a table, and you can actually set that up here. But that's kind of like a product outs common between the SQL interface and the data engineer, so I'm not going to get into that. There's sample data you can look at. So if we open up the Data Explorer, we can actually see the New York City. Right? And in New York City, we can see trips. And then we have to have a cluster always running. So I created a cluster called MVP 2023. And we can see it brought up the columns for this delta table. It's a delta. And if we do the sample data, it's going to query the delta table, and it tells you it's 6 files, and this is the total size of the files. And it depends. I did do a small, again, because I'm pinching pennies, so hopefully not too long. And so we can see there's actually, here's the data, and it's actually paginated, which is kind of interesting, okay? So we basically have the top pane here, which if we go back to SQL, right, is like the home in which you get this query editor. It's quick launch points, sample dashboards, sample data, and it talks about partner. Like, hey, if you don't want to worry about getting data into there, you could use Fivetran, which is like an ETL tool, Golden Gates almost like, in which you say, hey, read on premise and push it to the cloud. And if it shows up in that directory, then you can
John,
load it. Yes.
I think you're not sharing the right screen.
I'm not sharing the right screen, then I will stop and share again. Because what I'm seeing, unfortunately, let's stop sharing. I appreciate that. I'll show it again. Can you see?
Yes. Now I'm.
Yes.
I will say it over again. I apologize. We'll have to extend it a few minutes, but again, I will stop sharing and sharing again every time I transition, so make sure you have it right. It did switch over, trust me.
And John, you do have a question in the chat. I don't know if you want me to read it now or.
Sure, I'll go with that, and then we'll go back over the interface then. Go ahead.
Okay, so we've got the question, is Databricks expensive than Databricks SQL expensive than Databricks data science and data engineering? The reason I ask is because we can use magic commands like %sign SQL to use SQL.
Exactly, you can do that. And in fact, if you're studying for any of the Databricks exams, which I'm doing, right, you can do, and again, I've been using Databricks for 3+ years on projects, that you can always do spark.sql, right, and then give it a SQL statement. Now, the SQL statement is dependent upon if there's temporary views that are tables, temporary replace or create view, right, and that's just basically a temporary Spark view, right, high view, and it represents a table, and the table represents a file. And yes, you could join 2 files on a column that's consistent and then return the data, right? It's very simple data engineering. You can also have them as persistent files, right, in a table. The idea is to get away from all that program just to do straight SQL. So if you want to do straight SQL, say you got some end users that want to do their own thing in the data lake, you point them to the data, you say, guess what, you can do everything in SQL, and let's set them off, okay? So that's a use case for this. Do we have any other questions?
No further questions in the chat.
Awesome. So again, I apologize. Sometimes there's technical difficulties. So again, this is the main one. This is SQL editor. So this allows us to get in. Our first one is going to be 01. I label them 01 through whatever, and that we're going to create a database. So this is the interface for the Hive meta storage, right? So we have some samples, and we talked about some in New York City. This is TPCH, which is like a data warehouse timing, right? But we're going to create our own, okay? So we can do the same things you're used to in SQL, right? We have, comments here, right? Multi-line comments, right? Then we have single-line comments. We can say, hey, by the way, if the schema exists, which is the database, just drop it, right? If I hit the run button, it's going to tell me it took 151 milliseconds to run. That's pretty quick, right? And it tells us, hey, this is the result, and that's it. Now I can create the schema, right? I'm going to create a database. Cool thing about the syntax, it's more like the Oracle MySQL type syntax, in which, unlike SQL Server doesn't have this, I hope they get it. You can put a comment right here, right? So if we run this, it's going to create the database, and we can see, hey, it took 0.05 seconds, pretty quick. One row returned. We can look at advanced stuff like how it was scheduled. Okay, I created it, so I'm logged in as myself. This is the warehouse. It gives you all this timing here, which is kind of cool, right? So we're going to go back to, if I can close out of this, let's see. Boom. I'm going to go back to this and we're going to just use the describe command. So the describe command shows details, okay, behind it. So we can see this actually, when I created a database, it put it into the Hive, right? And where did it go? Well, it's a local Hive because it's in the DBFS, user Hive warehouse, right? And then Azure Databricks SQL. That's what we're talking about. If we're curious, we can also go to the schema browser, right? And if we go to the schema browser and we go back to the Hive Metastore, okay, it's going to allow us to go ahead and query the databases. And now we can query this database. And guess what? It's going to come back and say, hey, there's no tables here, which is true. Another fun feature that it has is that you can pass it a tuple. So this is a tuple, right, of data. And we can actually set database properties. So these are like extended properties. First we had a comment. Now we can put extended properties in. And if we describe the extended properties, okay, we're suddenly going to see not only where it is, but we can see that the properties here, it was created by John and whenever it was. This is the wrong date. It's probably when I created the demo. Okay, so we're going to create a table next. Okay, so before we saw no table here, we're going to talk about a little data set that I found on Wikipedia a long time ago. So we're going to create the continent table, right? So there's different continents out there, and it all depends on, you know, which text you read. What's a continent? Is Africa, South America, so on. So this is creating a table. And again, this is not going to be blinding fast. Remember that while I'm not backing this by any storage, right? We're just creating stuff in Delta. And Delta is on the, you know, we saw it, DBFS users slash wherever warehouse slash, you know, this database name. And now there's a table name. And now we can go ahead and just do a very simple insert, right? And an insert allows you to do multi-row. We can do a select. So we're doing all the typical stuff we'd do like in SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL. But in reality, you know what it is? It's just an interface that's running on top of Spark. And again, this might be running a little slower because I'm pinching pennies. I don't have a big cluster. The bigger the cluster, the more pennies you spend. So it didn't take that long. It took 18 seconds. Obviously, it would take mere seconds in SQL, but again, I'm not paying much money for this one, only $1 an hour or something like that. So now I'm going to go ahead and make a table called cars by country. So I'm going to run this. And now we're going to load a bunch of car data, right? And this car data is just basically like how many cars each country has and associate it with that continent, right? So where it is, we can run this. Okay, and we can show the data from the table. Okay. So the interesting thing is we have data here, and we saw that if we have too much data, it'll paginate it. This one we have 29 rows, and guess what? It gets paginated. So now we go to 39. Let's do some regular stuff that we usually do in a SQL database. Now we have two tables, slash files. How do we join them? Well, select from one table, join the second table on some ID, which we know it's a continent ID. And the first one we want everything. The second one, we just want to know, hey, where is it located, right? And so we can see Argentina, if we go over it, it's E is South America, right? And then if we do Australia, we say it's continent Oceania, so on, right? So again, now we have data. It's a very simple query. We can create views, right? So that same data that we had, we can create a view. So say I do this same processing over and over again, right? I can store that processing. And again, it could be a lot more complex than what I'm showing you here. There's plenty of functions in the system. There you go. Now we have a view to query. Use extended properties. So we can alter, okay, a table cars by country, and we can set, hey, create by date, and then we can also put a comment, the number of cars, and we can alter the table and add a column. Okay, comment primary key. So let's do these first two. These will work. Okay. And then we can do this last one. So now what we can do now is we can put comments in different places. We can put a comment on a table, put a comment on a column, and we can also bind extended properties to the table, okay? Now if we do show tables, okay, in the database, we can see we have 3 different tables, okay? This is just metadata. And we can describe the current table, cars by country, and we can see now that I got my comment in there and we got all our data types. So this is strongly data typed, right? Parquet/Delta is strongly typed. We can also show extended, okay? And hopefully in extended, we're going to start seeing some of the stuff we saw before. Oh, guess what? It knows that's hived, right? And in hive, okay, we can go to the right and we can see, hey, this is the actual schema here, but it has a lot more like checkpoints. It has, statistics. It shows you, hey, by the way, it's under warehouse / this is the database directory / country directory for the Parquet files, and so on, okay? And last but not least, we can describe extended. Okay, and this one we can come down and we can see, oh yeah, guess what? This is where it's located, but also we can see those properties we talked about, created by John Miner, date, and it talks about some of the checkpoint stuff on Delta, okay? So this is the key point here. A lot of stuff in SQL is there and it's supported. There's some things that are not supported, and I'm going to tell you which ones are not and also why they're not, okay? So the first thing is you must have Unity Catalog enabled, okay, for primary and foreign key constraints. So say I did alter table add constraint, right, here. Syntactically, this is correct, but smart enough to know that unless they change it, add table constraint is not supported for Hive Metastore. So I have to have a super Unity catalog, which controls multiple Hive catalogs to actually put a primary key and a foreign key on here. Now, one thing you might ask me is, hey, John, by the way, does this, actually do anything, right? And the answer is no. No, what it's doing is it's actually supplying some extra metadata, okay, to the engine. So when that Photon engine does the query plan, okay, the read through Spark, the table up, it uses it to just optimize it. That's all it is, okay? There is only one thing, okay, that actually works without having a Unity catalog, and that is a check constraint. So I know there's some data that has the change in percent of the car's production greater than 10%, but this one says it should be between 10 and 100. So if we suddenly put a check constraint on a table that breaks it, right, it's going to give us an error.
We got a question in the chat.
Sure.
Can we load data into the table from a Parquet or JSON file?
Yes, we're going to get to that pretty soon. So hold on. Great question. A good question is like, hey, what I'm talking about. A great question is like what I'm going to talk about. Okay. So we'll get back to that. So we can see that this change percent, right? This is being violated right now. So it doesn't allow me to apply that, right? But I know everything's between negative and 100%, right? So if I run this, this is going to work. And again, I'm trying to show you that even though this is Spark, that you can do everything, pretty much everything, except for a few things like, hey, you can't do constraints. But guess what? When you're using Snowflake, it doesn't obey constraints too. Okay, a lot of the warehouses like Spark Synapse dedicated, but it doesn't follow constraints. I mean, you can put them on. It's just extra. Some of them allow it just for extra metadata for the optimize. Okay, so I know I did not put Greenland in. Okay, so I'm gonna say, hey, is Greenland there? Right? It's just a select statement. We're gonna do some CRUD now, and CRUD stands for create. Right? So insert, read, select, U for update, and D for delete. Right? So it says, hey, it's no data there, right? So we're going to do an insert. Going to run it. And then after each one of these runs, we're going to go back to our select. We're going to run the select. And we should see this Greenland, right? And we can see that the percent change is 0. But say, guess what? In Greenland, we've been building a lot of cars, right? So we're going to say, hey, guess what? Last year, whatever year this was, we're increasing it to 10% changed. And so one row affected. And then if we run this again, we can see that the data is there. Okay, now we were 10, right? And we can also delete it, okay? And then we'll show it one more time. Then we're going to talk about another oddity that is with the warehouse. Okay. So another thing I did when I kicked the tires, and I say I kicked the tires like, hey, you know, this is cool, but what can I do, right? We can do a create table. We're going to create a table called emissions by country, okay? So we're going to create this table. And I'm just going to randomly put some data in. It's going to put some fake data in, right? Fake data 1, right? It's really 1, 2, right? I'm just going to put some values in, right? Okay, so at this point, if we execute this, we can see 1 and 2 is the emissions, right? We can also see that there's an interesting thing here. There's identity column. It's a big int, has to be a big int. Generate always as identity. Start with 1, increment by 1. You can change these any which way. You could start at 1, increment by -10, whatever. Does not matter, okay? Problem with identities is what happens if we delete and then reinsert? So let's delete. Okay, and now we're going to redo our 2 inserts. And we're going to expect, okay, that and we can see our stuff showing up, right? We got our car data, you got cars by country, which is a view, continent, and emissions by country, right? And now we can see a number of rows inserted, and it only now one of the things that I do, again, this is relatively new. One of the things I don't like is it doesn't do Mars, and Mars is multiple result sets. So in SQL Server, if you ran 2, you'd get both results here, 1, and then a window 2. It only shows you the last one. So it's something to keep in mind when you're running multiple statements, okay? Second thing is when we deleted, we expect that the auto increment would not get reset. So we're going to get 3 and 4, and we did. So, okay, that's interesting. But we know in SQL Server, if we go ahead and we do a truncate, this fixes our problems, right? So we can do those inserts again. Okay. Execute. And now we come back and we do a select. Uh-oh, 5 and 6. So something's going on here, right? Well, the problem is that this information, okay, is actually stored in the file. It's not stored, it's stored in the Hive catalog, not in the file. So because of that, okay, even though we did a truncate table and it got rid of the data, it did not reset the count, okay? So the only way to reset the counter is to use the following statement. We actually have to do create or replace table. So we have to replace the table schema. And it makes sense because, hey, we're truncating it anyway, so who cares, right? So now if we go ahead and we run create and replace table, we insert our data and then select it, we're going to get back to 1, 2. Okay, cool. So at this point, we're going to go back to a little bookwork again on a slide deck. Any questions? If not, we'll continue. And hopefully everyone's seen the slide deck. Deborah?
See the slide deck.
Awesome. Just want to make sure. I know I had a little technical difficulties. I'm going to ask that each time, okay?
Sounds good.
Awesome. So data lake files, what are we talking about, right? Well, we're going to talk about some foundation here, right? So most Azure services are built upon the foundation of 3 copies. So that's good. We got business continuity, right? And if we go ahead and we do a geo replication, we get a duplicate set in another data set, okay? And so data centers are automatically geo-paired, okay? Thus, North America is geo-paired with West, and you can look up the automatic pairing. You can also manually pair them, okay? The reason why I'm talking about this is so far we've been working internally, right? And so if those of you who have done, data engineering, which we talked about, Spark, we know that quote unquote, I call it a local storage, but everything in obviously Azure's remote, but you have something that's ready mountain DPFS, right? And typically you do, is everyone still there? Yes?
Yeah. Yes,
Okay,
yes.
cool.
Still here.
I heard a button beep and I was like, okay, I didn't get dropped off. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Thank you. um, so local storage, when you go in, Spark, it's DBFS, and that's already mounted, right? But it's in that area in which you can't see, right? It's kind of like off limits. You see a container, you see some folders, and then you can't get to them, right? So that's the quote DBFS. But we usually have to mount, okay? So we're going to talk about that right now. So there's several ways to access storage, okay? This one, if I remember right, uses a service principal, but we're going to talk about storage count keys. So that's the top level, okay? And shared access signatures is the next level underneath. Bad thing about storage count keys, they're kind of like token, you got the one ring and you rule it all, right? You get the storage count key, you get all power, right? You can drop everything, delete everything. Very dangerous, right? Shared access, just a little less dangerous, okay? I can give you power to say a container, read, write, execute, all total owner, right? Can also put a time limit on it. It's not the best access. The most granular is the service principal, okay? And then we can give you either owner, reader, contributor, right? At the top level, that's called ACLs. I meant RBAC. It's also called, they call it something else. I forget what it is on the portal. And then underneath it, we can also give you read, write, execute, okay? So how do you get the data in? So far in this design, right, I'm going to be a SQL guy. I'm going to kind of like, hey, I can read a table in, right? I'm going to show you how to do it. It's pretty easy. How do I get the data before that? Well, there's many different ways. You can use Azure Data Factory. You can use that product like Fivetran, which is a product that you say, hey, just get new changes in the database and dump it to the data lake, and you can pick them up, right? You can write your own, right? AZ copy, okay? Allows you, it's a utility from the resource kit. It's also the underpinning engine of Azure Storage Explorer. You can type AZ copy and copy stuff. In fact, I'm working with a client today and I had to write some AZ copy commands. You can also do PowerShell a little more detailed. You have to log in the subscription, tenant, change the subscription, make sure you're in the right resource group, and then you can run some code, okay? Let's talk about the details. We always want to use Azure Data Lake Storage because first and foremost, we can see here on the left, there's this ABFS driver for Spark, and it allows you to basically read Hadoop. Azure Data Lake Storage looks like a Hadoop file system, okay? And it also gives you, on the bottom is the stuff we known for the last 10 plus years, right? Azure Blob Storage. But on top of that, we have this hierarchical namespace. So we have a folder, a real folder, and I can give read, write, execute, and I can assign permissions at it, right? ACLs, access control list, right? And then this server-side Hadoop compatible file system logic basically looks like HDFS. There's a bunch of other stuff, encryption, right? Both in transit, at rest, we got firewalls, VNets if you need to. We talked about RBAC versus ACL, right? We talked about zones, right? And this is a really good picture too, because this shows some stuff like Lambda. Remember we talked about streaming? If we did Delta Live tables, guess what? That's streaming. Okay, we get something new, it puts it in a table. But we can also do batch. That means once in a while we just run a program, right? And we want to kind of create zones. You don't have to do this in a warehouse, right? But this is what you might see in your data lake when you're trying to read up stuff. You might say, hey, I want to get the most recent data from the gold zone because it's curated. Or maybe I want to play with the raw zone. Various file types. So there are certain file types that are used, okay? The main thing is that, weak file types, like someone said JSON and CSV, okay, they're have bloat, okay? Meaning that you have to replicate the tag for a named property on every single line or row in the file, right? You got a million rows, you got a million lines of bloat, okay? There's better file formats out there. That's why Apache came out with something called Parquet. It's column store, okay? It's binary, right? So you can't hack it. JSON, guess what? I got a text header, I'm in. CSV, text editor, and I can break them by putting extra characters in, right? Suddenly it doesn't read. Can't do that with Apache Parquet because it's binary. It automatically contains the schema, so you know what the columns are, you know what the types are, and it allows for compression and partitioning also. So much better file format. So let's talk about data access. How do we set this up? Okay, there's 3 ways to get access. However, I'm going to tell you the best one, which is we're going to use a service principal. Okay, but the second one was a storage credential. You can use that. I suggest not using it. And the third one's a shared access signature. So I already got this set up, hopefully. I haven't broke it since last time I looked. So I'm going back into, you know, I want to say Chrome, and I just want to make sure everyone can see what I'm showing you.
Can still see your screen.
Awesome, awesome. So back in Chrome, and what we can come down here, and guess what? There is some options, right? And if I find it, where is it? Might be menu options. No, that's the schema browser. They always. Let's go back here. Editor, workspace. It's not here. Dashboard. You know I'm in it as an admin, so why is it not showing me? It must be here. Okay, here we go. I thought it was a different place. You can come here and then admin settings. Okay, in admin settings, even with like everything else, you can add users, right? And you can tell them that they can have different access rights, right? And what we want to do is settings, SQL settings right here. They've changed the rules, so that's why I'm wondering about it. Hopefully this still works. Okay, here we go. Perfect. So they've changed the look of this. Before it was just very specific to SQL and it was down here, and now they've changed the design a little. So every time you go into Azure, things change a little. Okay, you're going to find that out. In the SQL warehouse, what we can do is we can add service principals. So what I've done is add a service principal, okay? And to know that, we had to have a couple things. We had to first know where our client password is, okay? And the client, I mean a service principal, and that has to be in a key vault. And we also need to know what the name is and where the storage location is. So if I did that, I'm going to hit add. See, it's going to ask me, hey, put the storage location. I put it in. Then I put the
Sorry,
client ID.
are
Yeah.
you sharing your screen?
Yes, I am.
I'm not seeing it. Are others
I
seeing the
will
screen?
stop
No,
and I will share it
I
again.
can see it actually.
I could see
Oh,
it.
you can
yeah.
see it, so it's on my side. Sorry.
Yeah, we'll see.
Thanks.
Cool.
Okay.
So again, I'll stop back again. So this is the admin console, but they've made it like confusing because initially it was just like SQL settings and SQL warehouses, maybe notifications. Now they put some stuff back in here, which I guess they keep on changing their mind how they're going to set this up. There's also something called serverless, and I'll talk about that a little, and then it's on the slide deck when we eventually get to it. Serverless is right now you're paying for compute that you own. And for that compute, I have to go over here and start the compute. It takes 2-3 minutes before I can start working. And that's just like Snowflake. It's nothing different. Databricks came up with the idea of serverless, in which, guess what? You use their compute. It's always ready. And when you say you want to do something, you just grab some virtual machines from them and you do your workload, okay? So the time to executing your query is a lot faster. To add the service principal, we put in the account name, the client ID, which is the service principal GUID, the directory name, and then what we have to do is we have to have a secret scope that's bound to Databricks, okay, and you can do that through data engineering and give it a secret key. Once you do that, you have now access to the data lake, okay? And so that is our next demo. So I said there was different places you can go here, right? One of the places is the workspace, and in the workspace, if we come back up here, go up one. And again, I'm somehow got back into data engineering versus SQL. So maybe that's why it didn't look the way it looked. Let's try this again. Admin settings? Nah, it's still the weird thing. Okay, so in the workspace here, we're at the top workspace, but it looks a little different than the other workspace from the engineering. Then we got shared, and then we got the warehouse, okay? So we're gonna do data lake files, And we talked about that. If you go here, it says, hey, copy AdventureWorks files to ADLS. So they're already there. Okay, so we're going to skip over that one. Going to open up the next one, which is going to be back to the workspace, shared, warehouse, right? And we're going to create from CSV. So we're going to play around with CSV files. So there was something called AdventureWorks 2 right here. So we're going to drop this. And okay, so make sure there's two things. You can say run all statements, or you can limit 1,000, right? So if I'm going to get rid of that and just make sure if you highlight it, runs one. So if we go here, we can see AdventureWorks 2 is done, right? We're going to create a new schema, give it some properties, and then we're going to use the schema, okay? Just going to run that. Okay. And now if we come here, we can see AdventureWorks 2 exists. And we can see also that this is our state, but we have default, right? So we could go and make sure everything's running in AdventureWorks 2. That's how you do that. So this is our compute, this is our Hive Metastore, and this is our database, okay? So now we can go ahead and say, hey, drop a table exists. Then we're using basically something similar to like Spark SQL syntax, create the table using CSV and give it a location. We're going to say that there's no header, it's delimited, okay, and then select. That's the reason why we have to give it the schema, because there's no header. And also it's a weak file format, right? Parquet is strong, so we don't need to tell it where things are like this. And now we can see, guess what? This is the AdventureWorks. This is our currency, right? And we can repeat this again, and we can describe it. So I'm going to run this. And we can see we have an int and two strings, okay? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rebuild the AdventureWorks there. Kind of straightforward. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go all the way down and select all the code and run it. And again, is this really building tables? No, it's taking files that you have, okay? And just basically saying, hey, this file is a table, and just create a table out of it, and then I can query it. Okay, so now if we run this, this is going to finish up the rest, and we should see a bunch of tables here. Okay, so we're done. So now we've built it. If we wanted to just, create a new query, you just do this, say, hey, over here, create a new query. Guess what? We make sure we're there. We can just say select any type of SQL that you used it, right? Select star from, right? And then we can bring over, I don't know, internet sales. We want to know how much sales we are. So let's see if fact, see it's nice IntelliSense here. So internet sales, right? There's some things that are different though. Like for instance, in SQL, you got top 10. Guess what? I wanted to limit 5. That shows me 5 rows. Okay. So let's go to the next demo, which is how to do it from Parquets, right? So discard. And again, so far we're not adding new stuff. We're just slapping a table on top of, existing files that exist, right? So workspace, shared, warehouse, create from Parquet. Okay, so this one drops for AdventureWorks. And again, we can come up here and we can see AdventureWorks is here. And we can't delete here. You have to use a drop, right? And so we can drop it, right? We can describe it. And then what we can do is the syntax is really simple. Drop the table, create table using Delta. And then we're going to use a Delta file. And then the interesting thing is this. This creates an empty Delta table. Then I'm going to copy into this empty Delta table using the storage account, using a Parquet, and I'm going to say just merge the schema. That's it. And then show me the Delta table and describe it. So I'm just going to go back here to run all statements and just click run. And if we run this, hopefully it sees it drop. And now we can see that, guess what? We only have one table, and now it's creating another. And so we can keep on doing this. And so basically we're now rebuilding our data warehouse. It's making Delta files, but then it's merging. So that means it's taking a copy of this data and merging it into the data, and it's actually, this one is in the bronze directory, but it's making the new Delta files in, okay, the silver directory. So if we had new data coming as Parquet files, we just need to point to it and say merge, and suddenly we have the data. And again, I can query each one of these and show you what it is. But the copy into is the main command for getting data in and merging it into existing table, okay? Talked about that. Okay, so let's go back to, I'm going to transition back to slide deck again and talk about load patterns. So loading tables, right? Load patterns. So there's usually two load patterns. One is like, hey, you hardly ever see this in a while, right? Load a full load, right? It's usually for reference data, right? Hey, guess what? I got a new file. Maybe I have cities or towns, and maybe there's a lot of building going out in Maine, and they created a new town. They split a town into two, right? That might be a full load pattern, which we get a new change, right? The incremental is pretty much the pattern that you see most of the time in real life, okay? In which you basically get a small data set that represents a changes over time period. So for instance, we get a daily update file. And so this pattern can be used with small to medium sized data. With bigger data, you want to worry about partitioning, right? So, whoops. So another thing we want to talk about is the Delta file format. We saw that it's using Delta. Why use Delta, right? Well, Delta is Parquet files plus the following things that come with it. Usually when you do a Parquet file, you don't get ACID. It doesn't, it's not atomic, it's not consistent, it's not independent, not durable. But when you use Delta, you do, and that's because it's using logs, okay? You can do time travel. That means, hey, go back and tell me what the data looked like yesterday versus today. It's definitely snapshot isolation. You can do schema enforcement if you want. If you don't want, like I said, hey, merge schema, don't worry about it, then not a problem, right? It's also open source, okay? So it's probably one of the best things that came out of Databricks, including like MLflow, Unity Catalog, Delta clones. Those are some really good stuff that came out of this company. Hive tables, two types of hive tables. We have both managed and unmanaged tables, okay? So you don't really need to worry about these too much. But when you go ahead and you say, hey, the very first one I showed you, create table on top of this file at this location, that's called the unmanaged table, okay? So if we drop, okay, the table, okay, we're not losing the data. The second one is I created a Hive table in Silverzone. It was empty. Then I said merge into it, merge schema. With that, it's a managed table because now it's in a location, and when we drop it, it's probably going to go away, okay? Advanced database. So we're going to look at 3 and 4. Create the Databricks works from Parquet using copy into, which I showed you, and create AdventureWorks database from CS file as unmanaged. So we did that. What else? So other topics. So one of the fantastic things about this, you can schedule queries to be run on a prescribed interval. So this is kind of like, that copy into is basically your ETL, bring stuff in, right? Read a file, merge it, right? How do you schedule it? We'll show you how. Also dashboards. Queries can be created to support visualizations. And it's really in its infancy. This is the very first version they came out with. It's not the best, but it's okay. And you can do parameters also. One thing that's kind of cool though is where alerts. You can create, this should be changed. It's not support visualization, but queries can be used to say find changes. So say I want to know that we didn't sell 100 products this hour. Well, then maybe there's something wrong, or maybe we didn't make 100 things on a production line, right? So we're going to talk about schedules, dashboards, and alerts next. So no, I want to do again. It's interesting. I want to show you some things first and foremost is that if we go to queries, okay, we can see what we ran, right? So we can see in the past when this ran, right? So that was created at, right? And we can look at last executed. And if we click it this way, we can see that we ran some of these on 316, right? And other ones, I don't know why this hasn't been updated. Maybe it wasn't saved or something, but it should be there, and there's 20 per page. I don't know if there's more, or is this it? And this might be only keeping track of this history ever since the cluster went down, and maybe these other things pick up right off when, that doesn't make sense though. So I don't know why these are not really jiving right now, but they usually has the create and last execution here. So that's your queries. Dashboards, we can come here, we can see, hey, there's sample dashboards. We're going to create AdventureWorks eventually. Okay, we'll talk about that. Alerts, we can talk about alert and how you can trigger it, right? Data, we talked about this is the Explorer. We have both the Hive data and this is some sample files. And we can also go and look like, say, AdventureWorks 1, which was the Parquet file. So we can see that. And we can, find details about it and say, hey, it's on the storage, say. It's under, the Silver Zone, Delta table. SQL warehouses. This is one of the things I didn't show you, but I want to show you before we end up the talk, is that under the SQL warehouse, you have to create a warehouse. This says Pro, but if we create warehouses, we have many different options. We can say Classic or Pro. We can do advanced options, right? And channel and in channel. Channel means something that is actually they're currently selling. This is like preview. You can pick cost optimize versus, hey, I don't really worry about it running fast as long as I get the cheapest cost versus I want reliability, so I'm willing to pay more, okay? And for that serverless, we have to, enable that at the admin console, not at the warehouse level, okay? And what's interesting compared to Spark, in Spark, you get to pick, hey, I got a single driver node and maybe it's just a single cluster. So the worker's on the same cluster. I just scale it up really big, right? Or I have a cluster and I have one executor node and I have 10 worker nodes. So I have 11 nodes, right? And here you don't get to pick that. You just get to pick the size. So the suggestion 80 dBUs per hour, and you can figure out what it is. The one I'm running, I think, is a small or medium, one of these. So that's why things are probably running a little slower. But that's our compute right here, okay? So we're going to go back to the workspace and go to the next query. And we're going to query some table, okay? So we're basically, one of the things we did is we load VentureWorks 1. One of the things I like to do after we load data is, hey, by the way, can we union all the data and get me a count, right? So does this run relatively quick because I'm actually going ahead and looking at, 9 different tables, and guess what? It did pretty good, right? So 120,000 rows, so on, right? We can also create a view. So I'm going to create this view called AdventureWorks 1. It's prepared data, okay? And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to join a bunch of the tables together, okay? And this is going to be prepared data, and this is what we're going to use, okay? If I remember right, in one alerts, or maybe the reporting, I think. I think it's the reporting. And so now we can see that the data has been collated, so we don't have to worry about category and subcategory and product. They're all put together. We don't have to worry about the customer's age and income group. It's all collated into a nice amount that we can actually do some queries on. We can also use a view to aggregate it. So say we wanted to use a view and say, hey, for a given calendar year, for a given region, give me how much I'm selling and how much it costs so I can know how much profit we're making, right? So I can run this. And guess what? It came up with this report. Nothing to write home about, but it's kind of cool. Okay. So we're going to open up the next query. And so we showed you how to do some querying and create a view. And now we did this. We're going to talk about visualizations, okay? So when we do visualizations, we want to write a query that's going to be used to do the visualization. So if we hit run, it already know that I had visualization. So the default is just basically I'm having some type of tabular result set. But I can actually start doing graphs. So now, nothing fancy here, but I'm basically looking at sales by region. But now I have a pick year. Okay, there's some simple things that you can do. And we can see the pick years represented by the regular SQL query. But guess what? We have, you know, Prency, pick year, Prency. And guess what? When we change this value here and hit apply changes, it's actually going to change the graph on us. Okay. Can also do the same thing with sales by region. Okay. Now, what you do is you do these visualizations as queries and you put your components here. You can also say pin it to a dashboard. Okay. So if we go to our dashboard, which is the VentureWorks dashboard, we can see that, guess what? Those things that we actually created are now here. And now if we go ahead and we change this to, say, 2015, hit apply, it's applying to both. And there might not be any data in 2015. Oops. So we go to 2014, hit apply, and we can see some data. And so we can see, you know, the quantity sold, and we can see actual dollars made. Okay. So you can do, you know, analysis queries, and those analysis queries that you do visuals, you can pin to a dashboard. Okay. What's the next thing I want to show you? So under the warehouse, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about scheduling a query and alerting. Okay. So now what we want to do is we need to create some data. So I'm going to create this thing called car mileage. It's going to have mileage ID, mileage amount, a date, timestamp, and a country. Okay, so we're just going to say, hey, we're recording mileage, right? And this is going to not any of the VentureWorks, but this is going to autos, okay? And then what we're going to do is we're going to insert into, and we're going to say we're going to get a random number and one as that ID, okay? So we're going to run this. So we got one and a number insert. Interesting thing is we run this particular one right here. And again, I'll make sure that we're not run all statements, but just run a single statement. We can see we have a random number up to 500. What was this? 5 million. This is 3.5 million. And for country one and date time. Okay. We want to generate data and do some alerting off this. Okay. So what we're going to do is now we're going to save this. Okay. Going to schedule it. It's never. I want to run it every 1 minute. Okay. So hit OK. And now this query is saved. And if we go to queries, we can see that it's scheduled now every minute, right? Okay. That's kind of weird because I don't say why it said last executed is 214. We know that's been updated. So there's something really wrong with this dashboard. But at least this has been updated. That's the most important part. I want to go to alerts. I already started alert. Okay. So I want to do on this query, alert query. I didn't show you that yet. So let's go back to the alert query, which is under the dashboard. I could probably did it there if it was listed. Let's see if it's listed. 9 right here, alert query. So I click on this, we can say, hey, select case when the mileage mod 5 is 1, then it's 1, otherwise 0. So I want to know every 5 if we're going to send an email out to myself, okay? So it's 0 right now, so we want to hurry up and go catch it. So to do that, first we need to do edit alert, right? So we click here. It's going to go to Crafty DBA, so he's going to get it, right? And what we want to do is we want to edit it. So we're going to hit edit, right? And refresh, we want to do every minute, okay? And now we're going to save change, okay? And so hopefully that will trigger off. This is the last one. So it says triggered, but I know it hasn't really triggered yet. Maybe last time it's triggered. And okay, every minute. So we'll let that go. I'm going to go back to the slide deck because I'm running out of time, but there is about 4 slides I really want to go over to give you some background information. That'll be helpful if you want to use this, regardless of whether or not you're using the data warehouse or engineering. SQL, they're both really good concepts. Unity Catalog. What is the Unity Catalog? It's come out within the last year or so, and what it is, it's a super catalog, I like to call it. And it allows you to go ahead and to have one or more catalogs put into a single space. So say I had a SQL environment that had their own catalog, and then I had a data engineering environment that's on a different cluster that had their own catalog, and say they want to share data, right? That's what the Unity catalog's there for, right? So there's something called delta sharing. So in the past, we had to duplicate the data between the environments, right? So today you can share it. So now we have this thing called the Unity catalog. We can have, say, partner A, which is maybe one division, and we have partner B, okay, and we can actually go ahead and share them. And you have to have cloud storage to do this, okay? And so you can give it, say, read write, delta sharing, and so on. You can even share with people that might not even have Databricks. Maybe they're using Spark, using Synapse, or maybe they're using Tableau, Power BI, and they know how to read use the SQL connection endpoint, right? So this will allow you to share data, okay? So that's what the Unity catalog is, and it's pretty exciting. Table cloning, right? So how do you duplicate one environment and another, right? It's a lot of work, right? So we just say you've been building this Hive table up, and it's 300 gigabytes. Well, maybe I want to look at it in dev, but I don't have anything other than read writes to write the queries. How do I make a copy? Well, you could use something called a shallow clone, which is basically it's a pointer. So now you can see that delta schema has been shared, but the actual data is in another place and you can query it. Also, you can do deep clones. So say if you want to do replication of data, you could deep clone it, okay? Third-party products, there's a bunch of them there for Databricks, okay? So Fivetran and Hevo are really good for moving data. I've used Fivetran extensively. It's a really cool product. It works on change data capture. So you can tell it, hey, just replicate it once. Or you can say, guess what? Set up change data capture on Oracle, whatever famous database you have, and a flavor, right? There's a ton of flavors out there that supports also file shares and whatever. Hey, you see a new file show up on a HDFS, NTFS drive on premise, copy it over to cloud. See a change in the table, send it over, right? DBT. I don't know if you've heard about DBT, but DBT is a framework for deploying, okay, schemas from one environment to another. It's based upon Python. Basically, you tell it, hey, this is what my schema should look like, and you deploy, and it'll figure it out. It's not only just for Databricks, say using Snowflake, people use DBT. You've probably seen these before, Tableau, Power BI, whatever Cognos, whatever database, reporting tool you have, right? It's out there, corporate reporting. In a nutshell, and again, I'm going to wrap up and then we'll go back to that last example I have. Databricks support is for basic SQL queries only, so you cannot do procedure-oriented queries. Okay, this is just like an entry level. Hey, you get some end users that are really good at SQL. They don't want to learn anything about Spark. They don't want to learn anything about Python. How can they get going? Okay, it's not a replacement for the data engineering, graph, or machine learning workloads. Okay, Databricks, and I quoted this from engineer. I thought this was really good, and it sums up what this whole thing I talked about today is about. Databricks SQL provides a simple experience for SQL users. That's all it is. Who want to run quick ad hoc queries on their data lake, create multiple visualizations, explore query results from different perspectives, build and share dashboards, right? And I'm gonna skip over this, but basically data lakes are great unless you get the end users using them. They're short-lived, right? Basically, the SQL warehouse is one way to get people that might not have really high-end technology skills to actually get productive if they know SQL, right? We talked about the Unity catalog, and that's a great way to share stuff, okay? And in short, if you're considering a warehouse offering for SQL users that need to work with data lake, this might work. And there's a bunch of references here, okay? Biggest thing is the secret scope thing. You need to set up the scope so that you can attach the storage, okay? One last thing, is there any questions, Deborah?
Yes, so we had a question earlier. Is Unity catalog created on top of Hive Metastore? If Unity catalog is not enabled and we create a table in Hive Metastore using %SQL in data science and engineering, is it still considered a managed table?
Okay, so I don't see me get an email here. So sometimes this is kind of funky, like when this gets kicked off, but I'll answer the questions and I'll turn my video on too because we're pretty much at the end. To be honest, I have not used Unity Catalog yet with any clients. They haven't gone that mature yet. The idea is that it's created in its own storage space, right? And then it can point to multiple hives and take the data from there and control what's going on with the data. So I think it's a superset of the Hive. Okay, so if you look at the documentation, you have Unity, and on the Unity you have multiple Hive catalogs, and on the Hive catalogs you have, you know, your tables, views, right, and functions. Okay.
Okay. There was another question as well too.
Sure.
If were you done answering that one?
I don't know. So you said, is it part of the Hive catalog? And the answer is no, it isn't. It's really above it, in which you can share between Hive catalogs. So, but when you deploy, you have to say, hey, I set up Unity catalog first, and there's a whole other interface you have to use. And so maybe that would be a good thing for a talk, but it's probably really complicated. Once it's there, it's pretty good though.
Okay.
John, would you mind to stop presenting? Because
Yep.
for the video, that would be good because we can see
Sure.
twice your stuff.
Sorry.
So. Thank you.
Okay. The other question we had was, how is version control done on notebooks?
Good question. Bad technology choice, I want to say. There's no such thing as notebooks here. They're kind of called queries, right? Even though they are notebooks. So it's a misnomer. They're kind of blending stuff. And I'm going to switch back in a minute, Deepak. I know you're probably going to say, oh, you're messing the video, but I want to show you what the difference is, right? I'll switch back and you can cut it. They're all in the same container. So if you don't have anything except for the SQL warehouse, it's going to look the same. If you have both data engineering and SQL, they're going to get blended. It is kind of a notebook. That is one of the things I did bring up with Databricks, and I am working with them right now on their preview. If they come out with it, I've been still waiting. There was two things I told them that they should be able. One was, how do you migrate stuff out? And there's really no easy migration, right? So I'm going to stop my camera, and I'm going to share again, and I want to show you a couple things that I pointed out to Databricks. There's actual tickets in to try to fix this, and hopefully they get to it, okay? So we're in SQL. We're in a workspace, okay? So the workspace is a blend of notebooks and SQL, which is kind of weird, right? Because we can see these are queries. It knows it's a query. But guess what? These are all my Spark talks, right? And if I go to my Spark book, I can see that's a notebook. So we're not really talking about notebooks. It's smart enough to know it's a query, right? If I go over here and I can hit copy URL, or I can clone, but I can't export it, right? Interesting, right? Also, you see there's no repo, so I can't check it into soft control, version control. Those are two things in modern platforms you have to have. You have to have repos, and you have to have the ability to move it from one environment to another seamlessly, right? Let's go to data science engineering, okay, and show you how you can be done really quickly there. Now we're in data science, right? And what's interesting is I don't know why data science is so into query. It's kind of like blending the two, which I wish they kept them separate. But say I'm here and I want to share the miscellaneous. This is all my Stack Overflow answers, right? I do. Oh, guess what? I can export an archive file. Boom. So now in 2 seconds, I look down and guess what? Now I have something called downloads, I have something called miscellaneous DBC, right? And say I want to restore that, okay, back into my environment at a different location. Well, now I can go bin. Well, let's create something called backup one shared. I'm going to shared and whoops, come on. I'll go here and then I want to go into shared. I want to do create. I'm going to go for, and I'm going to call this Toronto. Okay, I'm gonna create, should put like Man from Toronto, that'd be cool. Right, isn't there a movie like that? And then I go import, right? And then now I just say, hey, go browse it, right? Now I can browse miscellaneous, and I hit import. Voila. It'll take a second because I have a lot of notebooks. And then now I go into miscellaneous, and guess what? All my notebooks have been suddenly translated. I export. It could have been a whole different environment. I happen to do it in the same environment, back into a now new folder called Toronto, and on Toronto miscellaneous. So exporting and importing of notebooks which contain SQL code, Scala code, R code, Python, already supported. It's a deficiency in the SQL environment they already know about. There's nothing called repos. So I can hook the repo, right? I don't have it hooked here, but I could add it to a repo. And I could slide, copy that code over and it'll go into Get, right? If we go to the SQL box, right, guess what? We're missing both that ability to export and import, and we're also missing the repo. So those are two things on the wish list.
Okay, there's two more questions that we have here.
Sure.
One of them is, what are the best practices to control the cost of using Databricks in Azure?
Good question. Evie, I'm going to turn my camera off, but it's a good question. There are controls. There's a little button, I call it like a check mark, and you just want to make sure you do it in any environment that you create. Compute, okay? So a cluster or a warehouse, okay? So I hide my camera again. I'm going to share my desktop, and we're going to do it for the SQL warehouse. So say in the SQL warehouse, I have it running. Say, see right here, it says after 45 minutes of inactivity stopped, right? So I can edit that and I could say, guess what? I want to stop it after 5 minutes activity and hit save. I'm going to delete this cluster. Okay, the minimum's 10. Okay, they set a minimum in the other environment. They can't. Guess what? After 10 minutes, this is actually going to scale. It's going to stop. Now, one of the questions I had also is, hey, guess what? It finally worked. So remember I said the thing is it triggered? And guess what? Now it triggered it, right? It's a little behind the times. The first time the triggers start, they take a little. And see alert query. So now my alerts are going off, okay? So I talked about managing costs. That's one way. If you were doing in data science under clusters also, so we go to compute, it's a little different because when you go in these clusters, right, you get to pick. Hey, guess what? I have, this is a single node, so it's not going to really help me. But say I go into an interactive cluster that has multiple nodes, and now we have two workers, one head node. Guess what? See right here, terminate after 30 minutes. So hopefully that answers both how to terminate your clusters in both data engineering and SQL. I didn't do ML, but I'm sure it's there too.
Okay, then we have, can we connect to the views/tables that we create on the Hive Metastore from Power BI or any other cloud-supported BI tools?
Sure. The question is, are you willing to keep the cluster up? It's cost, right? So if we keep the cluster up, there's a SQL endpoint. So let me share. And I'll turn off the camera too if I can. Just my
That's
camera off.
okay. That's okay. Your camera can be on. That's okay, John.
That's
You're
fine. I'm just.
You look good.
Thank you, but I'm changing it anyway. So, and then what we can do is we can do Databricks, right? And then SQL endpoint, right? And if you look at the SQL endpoint, right, on Databricks, it's a JDBC SQL endpoint, right? And you can go down here and you can read all about it. I'll show you how to find it though, okay? So if we go back here and we go to the cluster details, if we go down to advanced options, if I remember right, there's a JDBC tab. This is everything you need to connect to it. This is the server name, that's the port, that's the protocol, this is the path. All this would be needed to put it into your Power BI connector, okay? But again, you have to have this cluster running. Now, if you're not willing to pay for that, another way to do it is, guess what? We have mounts, right? So on this one, I know I have that mounted to my storage up here, right? So I'm going to show you this, right? So if we go to containers, okay, this is my storage container. This is my data lake. Say my bronze zone, I have VentureWorks. I want to share it. As long as I have this in a format that is on here, Power BI will read Parquet, it will read JSON, it will read CSVs off the data lake. If you leave your curated data once a day in that format and you refresh your data set once a day from here, you can eliminate having to keep up the cluster to read directly from it. So again, it's the difference between doing a direct query to pull data in versus reading the files. And Deepak, are you asking a question?
Yes, I have a question,
Sure.
John, which is, we talk about the, data warehouse, which is cool, but as I learn, where industry is heading to is Delta Lake or Delta Lake House, right? So you can actually build whatever you want to build top of the Delta Lake House. So what is your opinion on that? So.
Yep, good question. A lot of people are using Delta Lake all over the place, right? and they call it Delta Lakehouse, but really it's just Hive tables that are using Delta formats. The nice thing about Delta format, it allows you to do time travel. So as long as you don't vacuum too often, a vacuum you're thinking about cleaning up, right? But vacuuming, yeah, I'm just like, hey, I'm cleaning up my surface, right? Going back and forth. But if you don't vacuum too much, then you have all the details, right? For yesterday and the day before. So if you only vacuum and you keep 7 days worth of data, you always can go back and time travel 7 days, which is kind of cool because maybe you want to know what happened yesterday, right? There's so much advances going on with this. It's just incredible. Like for instance, you can do partitioning, right? So I can partition by day, but then maybe your queries don't do partitioning by day. So you have to kind of think about it when you do your Delta Lake. If it's small data sets, you don't have to really think too hard, right? Because it just works. It's relatively fast. I mean, if you can get an answer in 3 to 5 minutes, hey, great. That's pretty good for a warehouse or data lake. I'm happy, right? But if you get really large data, then you need to start thinking about partitioning, right? And they have something called predicate pushdown that came out in Spark 3.0, right? So if we know the access pattern is always by day and by division, and you have a company that has 3 divisions, and that's how they look at the data, then you can say, hey, guess what? I want to look for everything that happened in February of 2023 for all divisions. So it's going to be smart enough, as long as you gave it all 3 divisions and the day, it's going to find those 3 directories and just read those files, right? Nothing else, right? So yeah, Delta Lakehouse is it's cool. I mean, we wouldn't be doing this stuff if the Delta format wasn't there. Probably the most exciting thing I heard that came alive probably was it like 2018, 2019.
And do you see like there's still those warehouse and then the lake house both will exist? Like we're also talking about the SQL, sorry, the warehouse you presented now, right? So it has a lot of capability with SQL. So far I know this is I'm one of the NDA, I should not be able to talk about it. Microsoft also have coming with those very same patterns.
They have new stuff coming out. Yes. They always have nice. That way we don't get an NDA problems, right? There's always something out there from Aquaman coming out, right? So we never know. But with that said, yes, I don't know. I haven't really been involved too much with the new stuff because I'm so busy with the old stuff, writing stuff, and it's tough to. There's enough to talk about the old stuff, and guess what? The old stuff people are not even doing that much work in, and now they're coming out with new stuff. So I'm behind, I have to say. But yeah, it's interesting. I think that there's just so many ways to do things nowadays. You can use ADF to create Delta, right? And you can use Spark to create Delta. And now we have a data warehouse that we can do Delta, right? And then you can do Synapse to do Delta. So I guess the thing is, as long as you know how, schema on read works, what a Hive table is, and what Delta is, I think you're going to be having a job for a long time.
That's great. Thank you so much, John.
You're welcome. And yeah, I miss seeing you, man. So we should just chat one of these days.
No, sure.
I'm talking on mute here. Thank you so much, John,
No
for
worries.
taking the time to do that presentation. A lot of great insights, and I'm going to make sure that I share the link to your GitHub. I already grabbed your presentation off of there, and I saw there's tons of resources on there, so I urge everybody to check it out. So I'll make sure I put that link in there, and we thank you so much for taking the time. And I guess if anybody has any questions, is there an email or contact that you prefer them to reach you at?
I will put a contact in here. I also do a selfish plug. If you've been paying attention to LinkedIn, SQL Saturday New York City is in May. It's coming up. I'm going to be there with probably an extra 50 other MVPs. So if you like iTalk, a lot of the smart people that will definitely be there. So definitely come check out the city. You can reach me at john@crafty, because I used to be a database administrator.com. So that is that. And I have an old website, does a lot of, SQL stuff. So if you're curious, you can check that out too.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I hope you have a lovely weekend and a good evening. And we thank everyone for joining, and we'll see you at our next session. So
excellent.
Good night.
Until next time, have a nice night now.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, John.
You're welcome.
Bye.